She was 7 years old, and she had never once in her short life been afraid of a man in a suit. That was what Daniela Conti would remember later, after everything had already changed and the world had rearranged itself into something she no longer fully recognized. She would remember the child first. Not the words, not the lobby, not even the way the room had gone silent the moment the little girl opened her mouth. She would remember the absolute certainty in a pair of dark brown eyes that had not yet learned what it meant to be afraid of power. The girl's name was Amara. She was small for her age, with 2 uneven braids and a gap where her front tooth used to be, wearing a yellow rain jacket 2 sizes too big that had belonged to her mother. And she was standing in the marble lobby of the most prestigious hotel in Milan, pointing one tiny finger directly at the face of Luca Ferrante, looking at him as though he were the one who had forgotten his manners. "Did you just call my curvy black mum fat and ugly?" The question did not shake. It did not waver. It did not ask for permission to exist. It simply landed in the middle of that enormous silent room like a stone dropped into perfectly still water, and every single person in that lobby felt the ripple. Luca Ferrante, 51 years old, the man whose name made hotel managers sweat, and whose reviews had ended more than one chef's career before it ever truly began, stood completely still for the first time in years. His assistant, a thin young man named Riccardo, took a half-step backward. The concierge found something very interesting to examine on the surface of the desk, and Nadia Cole, the girl's mother, stood 4 feet behind her daughter with her hand pressed flat against her sternum, eyes wide, whispering in a voice that barely made it into the air, "Amara, baby, stop." But Amara did not stop. She very rarely did. If you've ever felt invisible in a room that was supposed to welcome you, if you've ever watched someone look through you like you weren't worth the effort of being seen, stay with this story. Because what happens next is not what any of them expected. And before we go any further, if this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on the notifications. This story is one you're going to want to see through to the very end. Nadia Cole had arrived in Milan 11 days earlier with 43 euros in emergency cash, a rolling suitcase with a broken wheel, her daughter, a confirmed work contract, and the particular kind of hope that lives in people who have already survived the worst version of their own life and decided to keep going anyway. She was 34 years old. She had a degree in hospitality management from a university in London that nobody in this city had ever heard of, and a decade of experience managing boutique hotels in 3 different countries, none of which had prepared her for the specific texture of starting over somewhere new. The position was assistant general manager at Hotel Sereno, a 4-star property in the Navigli district that was trying, with varying degrees of success, to rebrand itself as a destination for international travelers. The owner, a nervous man named Signor Brambilla, had hired Nadia based on her portfolio and a video interview, during which he had seemed genuinely enthusiastic. What he had not told her, because perhaps he had not thought it relevant, was that the hotel was currently under review by the Italian Hospitality Association, and that among the reviewers assigned to their region was Luca Ferrante. Luca Ferrante did not have a television show. He did not have a social media presence that he curated with any warmth or intention. What he had was a column in a publication that had been running for 31 years, read by every serious person in the Italian hospitality industry, and a reputation for the kind of honesty that some people called integrity and others called cruelty, depending entirely on whether they had ever been on the receiving end of it. He was not a man who made enemies casually. He made them precisely, deliberately, and with full documentation. He was also, though this was not something his professional biography mentioned, someone who had not genuinely smiled at anything in approximately 4 years. Nadia did not know any of this when she walked into the hotel on her first official morning and found 3 things waiting for her: a passive-aggressive note from the outgoing assistant manager explaining the filing system in a tone that suggested Nadia would not understand it, a staff roster with 4 names she recognized from her interviews, and 6 she did not, and a message from Signor Brambilla informing her that a reviewer from the association would be visiting sometime in the next 2 weeks, and that she should make sure everything was, and he had used this exact word, perfect. She stood in the back office reading that message, with Amara sitting cross-legged on the floor beside her, colouring a giraffe with intense concentration, and she said nothing out loud. She simply folded the message, put it in her pocket, and went to learn the names of her new team. This was the thing about Nadia, that people did not always register immediately. She was not loud about her competence. She did not announce it. She simply brought it into every room she entered and set it down quietly and waited for the room to catch up. She had grown up watching her mother run a small guest house in Birmingham with meticulous care and absolutely no recognition, and she had understood from an early age that women who looked like them were rarely handed the credit they had already earned. So she had stopped waiting to be handed anything. She built instead. She showed up. She learned names and systems and what was broken and what was only pretending to work. And she fixed things in the order they needed fixing, without fanfare. In 9 days, she had already reorganized the breakfast service, identified a supplier issue that had been causing the kitchen to run 15% over on costs without anyone noticing, had a real conversation with the head of housekeeping, a quiet woman named Giuseppina, who had been doing the job of 2 people for 8 months and had never once been asked if she was managing, and had started the process of translating the guest feedback forms into 4 additional languages so that the hotel could actually use the information guests were already leaving them. Signor Brambilla had not noticed any of this yet. What he had noticed was that Nadia had not worn a blazer on Wednesday, which he had mentioned twice. Hamara, meanwhile, had made friends with every member of the kitchen staff, learned 6 words in Italian, decided that the cat who lived in the courtyard was named Professore and that he was her cat now, and developed a strong and very specific opinion about which of the lobby's armchairs had the best reading light. She was enrolled in a nearby international school starting the following Monday, and until then, she accompanied her mother to work each morning with her backpack and her books, setting herself up in whatever corner was out of the way, watching everything with those enormous, observant eyes. The day Luca Ferrante arrived was a Tuesday. The morning had been unremarkable, which Nadia had been grateful for. A small plumbing issue on the 2nd floor had been resolved by 9. A guest complaint about street noise had been addressed with a room change and a handwritten note and a complimentary dinner. The breakfast buffet had run cleanly. Giuseppina had, for the first time in what she said was months, finished her shift without covering for someone else's section. Nadia was crossing the lobby at 12 minutes past 11, carrying a thin folder of supplier quotes, when the front doors opened. She noticed him the way you notice weather, not because he announced himself, but because the air pressure in the room changed. He was tall, with the kind of posture that comes from decades of walking into rooms, as though he owned the concept of rooms themselves. Dark coat, no luggage, a younger man trailing slightly behind him with a tablet, and an expression on his face that was not unkind exactly, but was the expression of someone who had already decided what he was going to find and was simply here to confirm it. He walked to the front desk. He did not wait to be greeted. He said his name, and even from across the lobby, Nadia watched the receptionist, a young man named Filippo, who had been doing well all week, visibly recalibrate under the weight of it. She changed course. Folder still in hand, she walked to the desk with a steady pace and a level expression. "Mr. Ferrante," she said, "I'm Nadia Cole, Assistant General Manager. Welcome to Hotel Sereno." He looked at her with a specific kind of attention that she recognized from other men in other cities, the attention of someone deciding whether she was going to be relevant to him. His eyes moved over her face, her posture, her name badge, and settled somewhere between assessment and indifference. "Is Signor Brambilla not available?" he said. "He's in a meeting that was scheduled before your arrival window. I'll be your point of contact for the visit." She said it the way she said everything, which was simply, no apology built into it, no performance of deference, just the fact. Something moved across his face. She catalogued it without reacting and said, "Can I show you to the room we've prepared?" The tour was, by any reasonable standard, going well. The room was immaculate. The amenities were correct. The documentation he'd been sent in advance was accurate. He asked questions that were detailed and technical, and she answered all of them. He did not compliment anything, but he stopped looking through her somewhere around the 3rd question and started looking at her instead, which she recognized as progress. They were crossing back through the lobby when it happened. Amara had been tucked into her armchair with a book as agreed, but she had finished the book 20 minutes ago and had migrated, quietly and without announcing it, to the small seating area near the entrance, where she had discovered that if you sat very still and looked like you were reading, adults basically forgot you existed and talked about interesting things. She had a particular talent for invisibility when she chose to deploy it. Luca Ferrante paused near the entrance to make a note on his phone. Riccardo, his assistant, was slightly behind him, and Riccardo, who was 26 and sometimes said things out loud that should have remained thoughts, looked at Nadia's retreating figure as she turned to speak to Filippo, and said in Italian, in a voice he did not bother to lower very much, because he did not imagine anyone nearby would understand. "She's confident for someone built like that. Ferrante, you think they actually hired her for her management skills, or is it the, He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The laugh that started in his throat was quiet and male and entirely sure of itself. Luca Ferrante did not laugh, but he also did not stop it. He looked at Nadia's back for a moment and said, in Italian, in a voice that was low and dismissive and shaped by years of saying exactly what he thought about exactly what he saw, "She is what she is." Brambilla always did choose aesthetics over substance. A shame, really. The presentation does no service to the property. He meant it as professional observation. That was genuinely how it registered in his own mind. The weight, the appearance, the woman, the package she arrived in, all of it folded into his assessment of the hotel's choices, clinical and complete and devastating in the way that only things said without anger can be. Nadia did not hear it. She was 3 meters away with her back turned, talking to Filippo. Amara heard every word. She did not speak Italian yet, but she had been sitting very still for 2 days in a kitchen full of warm, fast-talking people who had taught her words with their hands and their faces, and she had learned, with the particular speed of a 7-year-old who is paying complete attention, more than anyone had tracked, and she had learned enough. She had learned, for instance, that grasso and bruto were not compliments. She had also learned something that no language class teaches, which was the sound of someone deciding that her mother did not count. She knew that sound. She had heard it before, in London, in a school meeting room, in a grocery store once, in the voice of a man who had looked at her mother the way you look at something that has gotten in your way. She knew it, the way children know things that adults pretend don't exist, completely and in the body. She put down her book. She stood up. She walked across the lobby in her yellow rain jacket, and she stopped directly in front of Luca Ferrante, and she looked up at him, and she said it. "Did you just call my curvy black mum fat and ugly?" The lobby went silent. Nadia turned around. The sequence of that moment happened in the wrong order, the way extreme moments always do. She saw her daughter standing in front of the most important reviewer in the region. She saw his face. She saw Riccardo's face. She saw Filippo's face, which was doing something complicated. She heard the echo of what Amara had just said, still moving through the air of the room. And she understood, in a single falling second, all of it. The ground did not open up and take her. She had been in harder rooms than this. She breathed. "Amara," she said, and her voice was completely steady. "Come here, please." Amara did not come. She was still looking at Luca Ferrante with the directness of someone who has not yet learned that some men expect to be looked at differently. "He said something mean about you," she said in English to her mother, without taking her eyes off him. "In Italian, I heard." "I know," Nadia said. "Come here." Amara came. She took her mother's hand and stood beside her, and did not look away from him even then. Nadia looked at Luca Ferrante. She had a choice to make in real time, in front of witnesses, in the middle of her 11th day at a job she needed, and she made it the way she made every professional decision, which was with full clarity and without theatre. "Mr. Ferrante," she said, "I owe you a professional interaction and I intend to give you one. I also want to be honest with you because this hotel's standards are built on honesty, and I hold myself to the same standard. What was said was heard. I won't pretend otherwise. I would ask that we continue this visit on the basis that every person on this property, including myself, deserves the same professional respect I have extended to you this morning." She paused. "That is all I will say about it." She looked down at Amara. "We talked about the chair." "I finished the book," Amara said. "There are 2 more in the bag." Amara looked up at her mother, then at Ferrante, then back at her mother, executing a very precise moral evaluation of the situation. Then she nodded with great seriousness and walked back to the armchair, picking up her backpack on the way. Luca Ferrante stood in the lobby of Hotel Sereno and felt something he had not felt in a very long time, which was that he had made an error. Not a strategic error, not a professional miscalculation, a human one. The kind that cannot be footnoted or reviewed away. He looked at Ricardo. Ricardo appeared to have stopped breathing entirely. He looked at Nadia. She was watching him with an expression that was professional and composed, and entirely without the pleading that he was used to from people in her position, people who needed something from him, people who had everything to lose. She was not begging him to be fair, she was simply quietly requiring it. It was, he realized with a slowness that embarrassed him, the most competent thing he had witnessed all week. He said in English, "The tour was thorough, your team is well briefed. The room documentation was the most complete I have received this quarter." He paused. "I would like to see the kitchen service at lunch, if that is still possible." "It is," she said. "I'll let Chef Moretti know you'll be observing." She turned and walked toward the kitchen corridor. He followed. Ricardo, after a moment, followed Ricardo. Behind them, from the armchair with the best reading light, Amara watched them go. Then she opened her second book. What Luca Ferrante found in the kitchen was a lunch service that ran with quiet precision. Chef Moretti was 39, self-taught in the first half of his career, and rigorously trained in the second, with a way of moving through a kitchen that was efficient without being aggressive. The plates were clean. The timing was clean. When one station fell behind by 40 seconds, the team adjusted without shouting, which was rarer than it should have been, and spoke directly to culture. Ferrante ate 3 courses. He took notes. He asked Moretti 2 questions that were designed to expose weak points, and Moretti answered both of them with the specific candor of someone who knows their work and is not afraid of scrutiny. Afterward, Ferrante sat in the small meeting room that Nadia had prepared for him, which had filtered afternoon light and good coffee, and a printed summary of the hotel's recent guest feedback, organized by category, with a column for actions already taken and a column for actions in progress. He had not asked for this document. It had simply been there. He read it twice. Then he sat with it for a moment longer than he intended, because something in it was making him think about something else entirely, and he was not accustomed to that happening during professional reviews. He thought about the child in the lobby, the yellow rain jacket, the absolute and total lack of fear. He thought about the woman who had responded to being publicly humiliated in her own workplace by choosing clarity over collapse, professionalism over performance, dignity over desperation, all while holding her daughter's hand and then very calmly sending the daughter back to her chair. He thought uncomfortably about the fact that he had been in this industry for over 30 years and could count on one hand the number of times he had encountered someone who managed people the way Nadia Cole managed people, which was as though they were worth managing, as though their competence mattered, as though the work itself was the point. He thought about what he had said. He was not a man who reviewed his own words often. He had built a professional identity around the idea that saying the true thing was always better than saying the comfortable thing, and that sentiment, while not wrong exactly, had become over the years a kind of armor he wore without examining the weight of it. He had been unkind in the lobby. He had been unkind in the specific way that powerful people sometimes are, which was casually without real intention, as if the person being diminished were simply part of the landscape. He had a daughter. She was 22 and she lived in Florence, and they spoke on the phone every Sunday in conversations that were affectionate but careful, the way conversations get when 2 people love each other and have hurt each other and are still figuring out how to be in the same room again. Her name was Sophia. She had her mother's temper and his attention to detail and a way of looking at him sometimes that reminded him painfully that she had heard more than he realized when she was small. He wondered if she had ever stood in a lobby somewhere and said something true to someone who deserved to hear it. He hoped she had. He hoped she had been exactly that brave. He picked up his pen and continued his review. Nadia spent the afternoon doing what she always did, which was working. She fielded 3 calls. She sat with Giuseppina for 15 minutes over the scheduling issue that had been creating the double coverage gaps. She approved the new supplier terms. She spoke to Filippo about the front desk response time, which had been 3 seconds too slow at peak check-in, and did it in a way that made him want to fix it rather than hide from her, which was the only kind of feedback she knew how to give. She did not think about the lobby. She did not allow herself to think about the lobby until 5:47, when Amara was asleep in the back office on the small daybed they'd set up in the corner, one arm thrown over Professore the courtyard cat, who had somehow appeared indoors, and the hotel was settling into its evening rhythm, and Nadia finally had 4 minutes to stand at the window of the back corridor and breathe. She had been doing this for a long time, choosing the room where she was not seen over the room where she had to keep performing, giving herself 4 minutes and then going back. She did not think of it as strength exactly. She thought of it as the only available option, and she had made peace with the difference between those 2 things. What she had not made peace with, and was not sure she was supposed to, was the particular exhaustion of having to decide, in real time and in public, whether to spend energy on the anger or save it for the work. She always saved it for the work. She was not sure she had ever been given the choice not to. She was still standing at the window when she heard footsteps in the corridor and turned and found Luca Ferrante there, without his assistant, without his coat, carrying nothing. She waited. "I owe you an apology," he said. He said it without preamble, which surprised her, and without the particular tone that apologies sometimes carry when they are designed more for the apologizer than the apologized to. He said it like a fact, which was apparently how he said everything. "What I said in the lobby was dismissive and reductive, and it was wrong. I am sorry." Nadia looked at him for a moment. "What did you say exactly?" she said. "In Italian. I didn't hear it." He told her, precisely, without softening the words because he was not going to insult her intelligence by softening them. She absorbed it, let it land where it needed to land. "Your daughter understood more than you might expect," he said. She was paying attention. "She always is," Nadia said. "It's her best quality and occasionally my biggest problem." Something happened to his face then. It was small and it was quick, and it was the closest thing to a smile that his face had produced in a very long time. It arrived and then retreated, like light through a gap in cloud cover. "She wasn't afraid of me," he said. "She's afraid of very few things," Nadia said. "Heights, the sound of balloons popping, people being unkind to people she loves." She paused. "In that order." He was quiet for a moment. "The hotel," he said finally. "The document you prepared, the kitchen, your team." He said it as though he were reading from a list, which she suspected he was internally. "It is all significantly better than the file I was given to expect. You've been here 11 days. "I have?" she said. "How?" It was not a question the way most people ask questions. It was the question of someone who genuinely wants the mechanism, not the sentiment. "I learned the names first," she said. "You can't fix anything in a building until you know who's keeping it running. Then I found out what was broken versus what was just being managed around. There's a difference." She shifted slightly, the way she did when she was talking about something she actually cared about, which was almost always the work. "Giuseppina has been doing this for 8 months without enough support. The supplier costs were bleeding because no one had looked at the line items since the previous manager left. The guest feedback was in a language most of the staff couldn't fully access. None of it was complicated. It just needed someone to look at it." "Someone had to look at it," he repeated. "Yes. That someone was you. That someone was me." He was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet from the lobby. That silence had been the silence of someone who had already decided. This was the silence of someone revising. "The review will reflect what I found," he said, "which is a property in better hands than I was led to anticipate." He looked at her directly. "That will be said clearly." Nadia nodded. "Thank you." "It is not a favor," he said. "It is what is accurate." She almost smiled. "I know, I wasn't thanking you for a favor. I was thanking you for doing your job honestly." She paused. "There's a difference there, too." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Your daughter, what does she want to be?" Nadia thought about it. "Currently a marine biologist who also has a cat sanctuary and writes mystery novels on the weekends. Last month it was an architect. Before that, a conductor. She has not yet narrowed it down." "She will figure it out," he said. "She'll figure out several things," Nadia agreed. "She tends to." He left the hotel at 6:20. Nadia went back to the office, gently moved Professore to the side, and sat on the edge of the daybed, watching Amara sleep for a moment before going back to the desk. The review that Luca Ferrante filed with the Italian Hospitality Association the following Thursday was the longest he had submitted in 6 years. It cited, specifically, the quality of operational documentation, the evident cohesion of the service team, the standards of the kitchen, and, in language that was precise and unambiguous, the leadership of the assistant general manager, whose approach to the property and its people demonstrated what he described as the kind of quiet competence that the industry required and rarely recognized. Signor Brambilla read the review on a Friday morning and called Nadia into his office and told her, with genuine enthusiasm, that this was wonderful, simply wonderful, and that she had clearly made an excellent impression. He did not mention the blazer. Nadia thanked him and went back to work. 3 weeks later, Luca Ferrante returned to Hotel Sereno. He did not have a review scheduled. He sat at the small table in the corner of the restaurant that had the best afternoon light and ordered the lunch service and took no notes. Amara noticed him from the doorway and walked over with the confidence of someone revisiting a conversation that she had already decided she won. "You came back," she said. "I did," he said. She considered him. "Are you going to be mean again?" "No," he said. She thought about this for a moment. "Okay," she said. And then, with the particular grace of a child who has already moved on, she said, "Do you know what a cephalopod is? Because I'm doing a project." He did not know what a cephalopod was in sufficient detail to satisfy a 7-year-old marine biologist in training, and he told her so. She sat down across from him and began to explain. From the corridor, Nadia watched for a moment. A man who had spent 30 years deciding whether places were worth being seen, sitting across from a child who had never once considered whether she was. 2 people at a table in a room she had made better, in a city she was still learning, with her daughter's voice filling the space between them, like it had every right to be there. Which it did. Which they did. She went back to work. There are things that 7-year-olds understand that the rest of us spend decades trying to remember. That cruelty is not strength. That a person does not become smaller because someone with power chooses to look past them. That dignity is not something another person can take from you without your full consent. That you can say the true thing in a yellow rain jacket in a marble lobby and the world will not end. Sometimes the world will even, quietly, correct itself. Nadia Cole had known these things for a long time. She had kept knowing them through rooms that did not welcome her, and systems that did not see her, and mornings where the work was the only thing that asked nothing extra of her. She had passed that knowing to her daughter without a single formal lesson, the way the most important things are always passed. And Amara had carried it into a lobby and set it down in front of the most feared man in Italian hospitality, without hesitation, without fear, without even fully knowing what she was doing. Only what it was. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you've ever been the person in the lobby who kept going anyway, you already know how this ends. You keep going. You do the work. You let the work speak. And sometimes, on a Tuesday afternoon in a corridor with 4 minutes to breathe, the world comes back and tells you it was listening the whole time.